Please be seated. James writes, faith by itself without works is dead. I think the part that struck me the most was disappointment in myself and in the person I was reading about. Deep disappointment. The beginning of the AA's big book, the first chapter, it's about the founder, a man named Bill W. And he describes, just in very few words, his descent into alcoholism. There's a point at which you feel like this is the end. He's now drinking several bottles of hard alcohol a day. He's lost his house. His in-laws who've taken him in have now gotten sick. His father-in-law has died. His mother-in-law is sick. His wife is sick. His life is falling apart. It's the middle of the Depression. It's 1932, and stocks are at their low. He was a Wall Street banker, and even in this state, he was able to get a group together to buy some stocks, and it would have been an amazing investment, but then it failed because he went on a bender. And so he came home and he told himself, this can't go on anymore. I'm done. And he told his wife, and he himself felt and his wife affirmed that yes, this time finally he was going to change. And then the next sentence right after is, and then I came home drunk. And it was that disappointment, that realization that, I thought we were at the end of the story, the part where he hits bottom and then we turn. And just thinking about that moment where here he was, he had lost everything and he had made a commitment and this was going to be different. And his wife said, yes, this is going to be different. And they had all that hope. And then not one sentence later, not a few hours later, he came home drunk and nothing was different. Last week, the dean preached an amazing sermon, you should watch it, where he talked about how our actions can shape our hearts. In last week's gospel, Jesus had talked about the reverse. Jesus had said, it's important to get our hearts correct, and then our actions will follow. And the dean wisely pointed out, you could nuance that, and the reverse happens too. That our actions can shape our hearts. That by faking it until you make it, you can actually make it. But the story of Bill W., and certainly at times in my life where I've tried to use willpower to change something about myself, and maybe it's true for you, tells me that it's not always that easy sometimes. What happens if you don't even have the energy to fake it? What happens if you hear from the letter of James that faith without works is dead, and you come to church every Sunday, and so for me to be a good Christian, I need to have these certain good works in my life, and yet I just can't do it anymore? What then? Over the summer, I was at a church conference in the Deep South, an Episcopal church conference. And so these were leaders who had been, since certainly the Civil Rights Movement, really reckoning in a deep and significant way with the legacy of racism. And certainly since 2020, the summer of George Floyd, they had done even more reckoning and more deep, intense work. And I was in a small group and someone confessed to me, but what do we do when we're just tired? I have compassion fatigue. I'm not sure I can do this work anymore. I'm not sure how much more internal work looking at my own racism I can do. I know I need to, and certainly my church and my people, we absolutely need to, given what we did, but I don't know if I can do it anymore. Faith without works is dead, but what happens when we don't have the energy to do that work? Harvard Business Review has an article that talks about diversity efforts, and over 1,000 studies have shown that most of these efforts, these trainings we do, don't work. They may last a day or two, and in fact, a lot of them seem to have a negative impact, that people actually, after doing a training and being told faith without works is dead, they have the opposite reaction. They say, I have compassion fatigue, I can't do this anymore. And some of them actually become less interested in doing this work. So how do we move forward? And I think it's important to think about this, because then we realize with some truth why Martin Luther. We can think about his own difficulties following the religious life as a monk, how hard it was for him. And once he found liberation and release in the gospel, why he said this letter of James, this particular passage especially, faith without works is dead, was what he called an epistle of straw. There was nothing of the gospel in it. Now, contemporary scholars today and pastors today will show you that actually Paul and James are not opposed, that Martin Luther interpreted this incorrectly, and I grant them they're much better scholars than I do. But I'm just talking about the lived reality of all of us who come to church or school or work and then are told, you must live in this particular way to be this kind of person. And sometimes we can do it, but sometimes despite our best efforts and our willpower, one sentence later, nothing has changed. And so how do we move forward? How can we make this passage today actually come alive in our lives? And I think the first step, and this is what happened to Martin Luther, it's what happened to Bill W., is a kind of hitting bottom. And that does not mean that once you hit bottom, everything is fine and now you're going up. What alcoholics say is, you're always an alcoholic, right? So it's not like you hit a thing and now you do the 12 steps and you're fine. No, you're always an alcoholic. And that idea that we are always perhaps sinners or in need of help has to always be part of this recovery. And I think maybe the best way to say it is, if you can't fake it until you make it, if that you just can't take that burden on today, then stop faking it. Just stop faking it. Tell yourself and God, and maybe if you can, people around you, that you are not the person you pretend to be. That actually that training you really don't like. That actually you are probably more racist, really, and not in a falsely modest way than you really are. That actually you're not as good, and you just need someone to tell that to, and to be honest, finally, I actually can't do this. And when we do that, when we sort of hit bottom and say, I can't do this anymore, I need a power greater than myself to begin to move me forward, then we can move forward. And then the next day when we think we move forward, we have to come back to that first statement. I need today a power greater than myself to move forward. This is not a linear process. You don't just do this once and then everything is fine. You don't just come to church, confess, love you, Jesus, I did all these terrible things, and now I'm going to be only doing good works from now on. It doesn't work like that. We are continually coming back. We must come back to this core principle that we can't do it. We are sinners. We are unable. We need a power greater than ourselves. And in our tradition, we call that power Jesus. Now, what's strange is after Bill W. finally does kind of hit bottom in this provisional way, and he's talking to another alcoholic who sort of brings him to sobriety, he learns this profound fact that faith without works is dead. This alcoholic who's helping him tells Bill W., I'm helping you because I need to do this good work because that is keeping me sober. And so for you, Bill, now that you have kind of understood a little bit of what sobriety is going to be like, that hard journey, you, to keep yourself sober, have to then go out and help other people. Faith without works is dead. And so I'm just going to close with the way that Kierkegaard, how he describes this strange paradox that is at the heart of our Christian lives. All of us in our lives have to live so that our lives shine forth with good works. That is absolutely how we must live. And yet at the same time, we must confess deeply to ourselves, really believing it, that nothing, not our lives, not our salvation, not my ability to just make it day after day, none of this is possible except for the grace of God.